My name's Gene Hester. Technically it's Francis Eugene Hester, F. Eugene Hester. And I grew up in Wendell, North Carolina, just 20 miles east of Raleigh. And I went to school, high school there, graduated all through high school, and then to Wake Forest for 2 years, not knowing what I wanted to do. My father was a medical doctor. My uncle, for whom I was named, was an attorney. Thought maybe one of those things. Wake Forest, 2 years. Frankly, I was a fish out of water. I've taken 2 years of European history, learning more about what King Henry IV did, and who he married, and who his children were, than I ever wanted to know. And 2 years of religion, 2 years of French, as I say, I was a fish out of water. Fortunately for me, my brother, one of my older brothers, said, I think you'd be more interested in forestry. So we went to NC State to look into forestry, and that's when I found out there was a thing called Wildlife Conservation and Management. I said, stop right there, I want to find out about that. So I went over there and signed up for a curriculum in the zoology department at the time, Wildlife Conservation and Management. I got a BS and master's degree there. Then I went, in my naivete, I mean extreme naivete, I thought to be a fish and wildlife biologist, you need to have training in both. I got a degree in birds and mammals at NC State, including the wood duck. I went to Auburn to study fisheries. And people began to ask me, when you're through, are you going to be a fishery biologist or wildlife? And I thought, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm going to be a fish and wildlife biologist. And except for 2 years in my career, it had been to my advantage to be both. But after finishing a PhD degree, I was offered a position at Auburn University to teach a course, which I did. And then soon I was offered a position to come back to NC State on the faculty. And so I came back and was a faculty member for 4 years, and a co-op unit was formed. And I was selected as the first unit leader for the cooperative unit there at NC State. And at that time I became a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service employee. And so for 8 more years, I was there as a Fish and Wildlife Service employee stationed on the university campus, just as the people in the unit are there today. And then I was asked to go to Washington to head up basic research. Basic research at first. Then when they found out I had fisheries and wildlife, they asked me to be head of all research. And so that's part of what I mean by an advantage to have a foot in both camps. So after being associate director for research for quite a few years, with some responsibility for ecological services at times in there too, when we didn't have a director, politically thrown out, I was asked to be acting director. And so I was for 8 months until we got a new director. From that point on, I worked in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as deputy director, and subsequently was selected to go over to the National Park Service as associate director for natural resources in the Park Service. And then when Bruce Babbitt was establishing that National Biological Service, he asked me to come in and make it work. So my career has been to work for political appointees 8 times over. Somewhat challenging in the sense that some of them want to go that way, some want to go that way, as you know from changing administration right here in North Carolina. And having them recognize you as a career person and not being an enemy is part of the challenge. Because you help folks go that way, and we are here to undo what they did, and you help make it happen. So, you got to convince them you're not trying to sabotage your program. And so it takes about 4 months to convince them, and once you do, they realize they can't get the program done without you. in the sense of career people, not just you individually, but you as part of the career service. And so the thing kind of equalizes out, and then they recognize you're the person to make it happen. And so we form kind of a partnership. Then after another year or two, they're gone and somebody else comes in. But anyway, 8 times over, I worked for a political appointment. I was never a politician, nor did I ever want to be, but I worked for them. And I was right in the midst of the major controversies. I mean, everything from Animal Damage Control you heard about this morning, to Endangered Species Act, the refuge system, the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, you name it, we were there. Steel shot, lead shot, all those things. Nobody was standing by saying, what do you think we should do? But my position was to be at the table when the decisions were made. And that's one of the points I want to make tomorrow. Nobody's asking people to be a politician. The question is, can you be in a position to help influence a decision with what you know as a biologist and as a natural resource manager, because there are going to be people coming from every direction, as you heard, the economic considerations, the biological, the economic, the political, they're all coming in there. So you want to have a seat at the table to have your voice. So anyway, that's basically the summary, but I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Okay. So, Mr. Gene, can you tell us about some of your mentors?
Well, when I was at NC State, my mentors were some of the icons of the time. Tom Quay and Fred Bartlow. Bartlow was a mammal guy, and he was the head of the department. Tom Quay was the birds guy. I got my master's degree on the Tom Quay. In fact, when I took the course on ornithology, he gave each of us a species of bird to work on and to make reports on. I chose the wood duck, Carl Jorgen chose the Canada goose, on down the line somebody chose the mockingbird and on the thing. The idea was to go find out about their life history and read about it, and then also go get your hands dirty and find out about what's happening. Find a nest and check the young and that kind of stuff. So along about that time was when I first learned that a wood duck nested in a hollow tree. That blew my mind, because I knew about ducks going to the Dakotas and to Canada and Alaska, nesting in weeds and bushes and marshes, but never a bird, a hollow tree. And so here was our own wood duck nesting in hollow trees. So I began putting up wood duck boxes and counting the eggs and that kind of stuff. And it led to 60 years now I've been doing that kind of thing, including some years banding the hen females and marking the baby ducks with a whip tag. So, but they were my early mentors. I went to Auburn, and H.S. Swingle, world-renowned pond management guy, was my mentor there. And then, so from then on, it's been administrative kind of people.
How would you describe the changes you observed in the wildlife profession from the day you started until today?
Changes in what?
In the profession, in the wildlife community from...
Well, I think in the old days, it was sort of like biologists were left alone to do their job. Today, as you heard, coming at you from every direction. Everybody's an authority. And you've got organizations that oppose what you're trying to do. And some of them, I will tell you later about the economic incentives to do that. There's some agencies that make themselves rich by taking you on. Whether they're right or you're right, doesn't matter. They take you on because they can make money out of it. And I don't necessarily want to go into it now, but I want to tell you about it later. And so now, you talk about a political force that's dealing with you today. You asked Bob Brown about the animal husbandry, deer and elk in North Carolina. I mean, the biologist knew a lot about the disease and how to keep it out of here. but the force was so great, economic force was so great. The livestock interest and the husbandry interest in this thing was so great, the legislature took it away, put it somewhere else. And you talk about the red wolf. Well, much of it doesn't have to do with biology. It has to do with a heck of a lot of other things. The sociology, the economic impact, impact on other people, whether we did what we said we were going to do, whether we can control them, what happened about the coyote coming in, a whole bunch of things you can't really control. So that doesn't minimize the importance of being a biologist and knowing the biology, but you got to understand you're dealing in a world now with a lot of people coming with different ideas and a lot of force behind it.
So what would be some advice you would give to someone starting out today, a young conservationist?
My advice is be a good biologist and natural resource manager, but don't be oblivious to the fact that you live in a political system. And nobody's asking you to be a politician, but you are expected to understand you're part of a political system, and people above you are more involved in the political system. And so it's your job to help provide them the best information you have, and it's their job to make some decisions. And when they make decisions, it doesn't always go in your favor, and you've got to understand they have taken a lot of things into consideration. You didn't have to take it into consideration. But you're part of a team. You make your recommendations. You take your best shot. You make your best argument. And somebody makes a decision.
What do you think makes a great wildlife manager?
A
great biologist.
Great manager.
Mm-hmm.
Not only does he or she understand biology and what natural resource management, but frankly, they've got to understand dealing with people, including their own employees. They've got to understand how to motivate people, how to set goals, how to do a strategic plan. For a long time I heard about strategic plans, I felt like most of them I was involved in didn't mean beans. But I got involved in a few. And to me, the strategic plan is you do this first, and then when you get that done, you do the next step, and then you do the next step. That to me is a strategic plan. And if you have thought it out, what's got to be done first before you can do the second part or the third part, to me that's a strategic plan. So if you have one that lays that out well, and you have the steps about how to accomplish those things, and that's important. I tell you, no manager ever knows enough about motivation or personnel management. I mean, if you've got many employees, you've got different people to deal with, and they react different ways. I mean, I've had some people that I could hardly deal with because they're so hard-headed. I've had others that thought I came down on them with a ton of bricks because I told them what they were doing and what they weren't doing. So everybody's different. You've got to customize it a little bit. And one of the things I've learned is let them set their own standards. They will always set standards more than they can accomplish. Always. Because they're so energetic about what they want to do. Let them set the standards. Then you can be as generous as you want to and backing down. And I understand you tried, but you know, the standard was so tough you couldn't meet it. But the standard's there. So you can grade on the curve. But let them set the standards of what they want to do and what they think they can do. And they don't understand. Some days it's going to rain. Some days you can't go. So, but anyway, that's part of what dealing with public, with employees is. You've got to learn how to motivate them. You've got to learn how to torque them to get the job done. You've got to be able to reward them. Be sure to tell them they've done a good job. And don't just wait till the end of the year. As time goes on, tell them, you did a good job today. Well, let's talk about how we can do this a little bit different next time. That kind of thing. So don't wait till the end of the year and try to make the decisions. Just go ahead and tell them now.
what would you think would be your, I guess, the highlight of your career, and then the low, I guess, the low point in your career?
The high points in my career were frankly being selected without applying for some key positions in government. People like secretaries of the Interior said, I need you to do this job. They recognized the ability I had to make things work. And that's a high point, because it didn't just happen once, it happened several times. Low points were when you change administration. Some people come in a very vindictive way. You were part of the enemy. I'm going to do everything I can to undercut you. I'm lucky I wasn't sent on a one-way trip to Midway Island, and they had the ability to do that. Fortunately for me, there were people who threw me in the lifeline 2 or 3 times. But several times I got in deep water. You know, you think that when you do a good job, you'll get rewarded. When you're in the kind of positions I've described, when you did a good job for the people there, someone else comes in, you're the enemy because you were doing a good job. Not because you're doing a foul-up job, because you were doing a job. You did the right thing. You did what they asked you to do, and you did it well. So that's part of a low point of career. It's hard to accept that you did it so well, and now you're going to be penalized for it. But those things happen, and I don't want to sound too negative about it, because that's the way the world works. So you just gotta ride with the tide and accept that it's not going to always go your way. But in my case, I'm fortunate that people threw me a couple of lifelines to pull me out, and those things happen. So both a low point and a high point.
What would be a story you could tell us, or what would be an experience you could tell us that would probably be your most embarrassing or funniest, or something, you know, something you think back now and you laugh about how it happened, you know?
Embarrassing to me, when I was the deputy director, I got sent to all kind of assignments. One of the most heart-wrenching was we had 2 employees get burned up at Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, wildfire. And one of them was a volunteer, and his best friend worked there, and he was working with him, and they were out fighting a fire. And as you may know, fires create their own weather. You can't predict which way it's going to go. And so they were out fighting it. They had some kind of tractor or something, and it ran up on a stump and high grounded it. And they got off, and they didn't have time enough to put their shields on. They got burned up in the fire. It's sad even to this day to think about that. Well, I was selected to go down after the dedication, and the boys' parents were there, and we talked about it. And I think one of the things that helped a lot was I had a son get killed by lightning, and so we formed kind of a bond, and that was a low point. I mean, you can't get much lower than that. Different kind of low point in a more humorous way, well, not humorous, but a different kind of way. As I said, in that position, you get called on to go give all kind of talks, dedications, and everything else. Well, I got called on to go to give a dedication out in one of the new refuges. And I got out there, and people of the local refuge thought because I came from Washington, I knew everybody in Washington. Every senator was my buddy and all that stuff. Most of them I didn't even know, and they were going to speak. Well, not only that, but it had everybody there from the senator to the congressman to the governor, on up and down, dog catcher and everybody else. They had so many people. They had a flatbed truck out there in the parking lot. 3 rows of truck seats about like this. 3 rows of them now, lengthwise, with little file cards with your name in there where you're supposed to sit down. Well, one of the humorous parts was most of us got seated and one guy came along and he said, oh, I'm supposed to be over there. So one guy backed his seat up to let him go by in the back seat came off he went for a flip right underneath it in front of all those people. Well, that was embarrassing to him, but then the thing that was embarrassing to me, I was sitting there looking at the program, and the governor sitting here had a different program than mine. When the band was going to play, who was going to speak, and everything. Hell, I was supposed to be master certificate. It had 2 agendas. So that was embarrassing. I didn't know how to pronounce some of the people's names and all that kind of stuff. But so that was embarrassing for me because we had to muddle through that thing and do the best we could. But you sometimes get set up those kind of ways without people intending to do it. They just think you know more about some things than you do. And at that same ceremony, I might mention, because I was acting director, one local guy came up to chew on me about some kind of land acquisition thing that he's opposed to that Fish and Wildlife Service was doing. And so I didn't even know what the issue was, but he knew and he was chewing on me. We did all wrong and backwards and upside down. And one of our federal law enforcement officers, special agents, was there. And he came over in the midst of that. He says, Dr. Hester, the director, the Secretary of the Interior wants to speak to you in the office over here. So he pulled me off. We got over in the office. He said, you didn't get a phone call. I was just rescuing you. So some highlights and lowlights and all that stuff. But anyway, all that comes with the territory. And you know, it was good times and bad times. Not everything was rosy, and some of the toughest ones were dealing with personnel issues, especially when you had to reassign people. I had one guy. We had a program for which the money had disappeared. We offered him the best job that we could offer him as a substitute, but it required him to move from Kentucky to Denver. And from working with birds to working with mammals. He was qualified to do it. We wanted him to do it. We offered him the job. He took it. But for the past 30 years, he has contended I've ruined his career. I mean, to this day, he feels like I have ruined his career. He thought we hired him to do a job, we should have left him alone for 30 years to do it. I mean, those are real problems. I mean, not everybody can see it that way. And maybe I didn't do a good enough job of explaining it. In fact, a lot of things you look back on, maybe if you'd gone about it a different way, might have gone better. But you do the best you can at the time. So some of them come out well. Some of them you could have done better. Just got to learn by it. I used to say, try to learn something every day, including some things learn to never do again. And in that political atmosphere, there are things like that too.
Tell us the story of Hootie, and then we'll be done.
The Hootie story?
Yeah.
Okay. I belong to a fishing club just east of Raleigh. We got a 150-acre lake, 50 acres under the swamp at a lake. My son and I would all the time go fishing up there in 2 different boats. He'd have his wife with him, and they'd have a walkie-talkie, and I'd have a walkie-talkie. We'd talk back and forth about what we were catching and what was going on. And one day he called me. We would hear these barred owls calling in the swamp. And once in a while we'd see them fly through the swamp. And one day he called me on his walkie-talkie and he said, Dad, there's an owl over here watching my lure as it comes across the surface of the water. And he called me 10 minutes later and he said, we just saw the owl fly into a hollow tree and we think we know where his nest is. And sure enough, I went over there, and there's the barred owl sitting in the entrance of a big hollow tree way up at the top. So it's pretty definite that's where the nest was. Well, about 2 months later, I got to thinking, if I carried my little recorder of a barred owl call and played it, what would happen? I mean, would they ignore it? Would they come? What would happen? So I played it, and what happened was a young owl flew over and circled around. I think, in retrospect, I think he was looking for his parent. What he found was me in that little recorder. But each day I'd play it, he'd come, looking around, he'd like the tree, look, and eventually began to hoot back to me. So we began to have a conversation back and forth. When my friend said, he's mocking you. Well, the question, who's mocking who here? I mean, we're starting off with a recorder mocking a bird, and here he is mocking a recorder and all that stuff. Well, anyway, I decided I was going to try to train him and try to feed him. And so eventually, I carried a dead squirrel up there, and I had a little island, and he would light the tree, and I'd throw a dead squirrel in there, and it would bounce a few times like that. And when it did, he would watch it. I mean, really intent on that, but when it didn't move, he lost total interest in the thing. I would go, come back in 30 minutes, still be there. I'd take that one away. A couple of days later, I brought another one, went through the same thing. It's obvious he wanted something wild, and the squirrel wasn't going to do it. So then I started catching fish, especially little cold and shiners, and carrying them up there. I'd throw the fish on the island. He'd watch me, it flopped on the island like that. But he wouldn't come, I was too close. When I'd back off, I'd come back 5 minutes and he'd be gone. So each day when I'd carry a fish, I'd throw it, I'd back off, but each time I backed off a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less. So after a while, I got to where I would be closer than me and you, and I'd throw it, he'd come down and get the fish. The next phase was I wanted to train him to come down between these two trees so I could photograph him, especially late afternoon. So he'd light on a limb over here, over there, whatever. And almost unbelievable, but I'd go over there and say, go over there. And if he didn't go, I'd take a fishing pole, tap him on this side, go over there, go. Eventually I got him glued to that very limb I wanted him to light on. That became his feeding perch. And so I'd go up and throw him a fish and he'd come get it. Well, one day I was up in the swamp. I have 44 wood duck boxes up there. I keep up with the eggs and the hatching and the baby ducks and doing some banding and tagging and stuff. And I was up there checking one. I got up earlier. I usually get to him about sunset. But I was up there earlier counting wood duck nests. And I looked, there was some motion up over my head like that. I looked up and there's an owl. And as soon as I saw him and he knew I recognized him, he flew back to feeding perch and waited for me. I thought, wait a minute, who's training who here now? He's training me to bring him that fish. So from that time on, we've had a relationship. Sometimes he would find me in the swamp, come sit over me, call to me and everything. And most times he's either waiting for me when I go up there, or I call him, Hootie, 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 and he comes and lights on that perch. Same perch every time. And I throw that fish, and he comes and gets it, and he sometimes flies right by, but usually he'll do a U-turn and go back over there and sit on the limb and eat it. If it's a small fish, he swallows it down like a kid eating spaghetti. If it's a bigger fish, he has to pick it apart. So he'll eat one, and then he'll turn back like, and he got another one over there, and so I'll throw another one to him. And I've taken this has been going now for 10 years. This spring will have been 10 years when I first started. I've taken about 300 people up to see him, mostly kids. And I wrote 2 articles. One of them for Wildlife in North Carolina magazine called The Owl Eye. Probably the most successful magazine article I have written for Wildlife in North Carolina, out of about 30. And I say that because of the number of people who wrote to the editor commenting about it. 4 people got in touch with me and wanted to make a painting based on the owl picture, which I said, go ahead and do it. two people made wooden carvings of an owl. One lady made a little ceramic owl and a little diorama with a little swamp scene and gave it to me. And I've never had anything like that happen before. But my friend Jack Dermott, who's been my mentor, one of my mentors, I should have mentioned that earlier, said, you have got to do a children's book about that relationship. And so I did. I wrote one called My Friend. It's written as a children's book. A little bit of a challenge for me as a scientist and an administrator to write a children's book, but I did. And I had the pictures to go with it. So it's got 23 pictures in there, and including all the things I've just told you about. And I've taken 23. I did 300 people up there. And most of them have been amazed. I mean, a lot of them never even seen an owl. And never seen one come 3 or 4 feet from them like that, repeatedly. And he's unaffected by how many people I take, unaffected by flash. He's just right there to do his thing. And if I'm taking a little too long to get the fish ready and everything, he comes and sits there and waits for me. I mean, sometimes so close I have to throw the fish behind him. And but anyway, it's been a great relationship for 10 years. So that's the story. The book is here, and as they give me about 45 seconds to tell about it, I'll tell. It had been selected by the Outdoor Writers of America as the #1 children's book. Amazon.com has it available for reviewers to review the book, and there have been 11 reviewers. All of them have been 5 stars. And the third thing is about 10% of the people who have gotten the book, I've sold about 500 incidents, about 10% of the people who've gotten the book have come back for more. So that's my story. That's my sales pitch.